Alors, dans le cadre des accords commerciaux,
now, in the framework of trade agreements between the EU and Africa, Joseph Owona Kono, president of Afriibana, a group of banana producers from Africa, is in Brussels to discuss with members of the EU Parliament for ways to make the European market more accessible. He joins us from Brussels to talk more about this initiative.
Depuis Bruxelles de cette initiative. Bonjour, monsieur. Première question.
Hello, and we go to the first question now. What is the interest of this group of producers that you established? Well, it is quite natural that the more we are strong. Now, it was therefore interesting in the light of what is happening in the EU market that we should speak with one voice around three objectives that we have set ourselves to maintain in the €75 tariff applicable to Latin America bananas beyond 2020, which is the deadline for the Geneva Banana Agreement. Secondly, is to keep the banana stabilization mechanism beyond the 2020 deadline. Now, you know, after the Geneva Agreement, a tariff dismantling schedule has been agreed, but unfortunately, Europe is engaged in bilateral agreements, which means that what was planned, namely the deadline of the tariff in 2020, which was to be 112 or 114, euros per ton is now already underway. Since next year, negotiations are going to start with some countries to integrate them at the rate of 75 euros per ton. So it's important that we together defend this position, because below 75 euros will spell doom for African producers. Now, thirdly, is to find ways to effectively support African countries, which in our opinion will allow to help rural populations and thus reduce migration.
Mr. Kono, what would you say are the problems of African producers?
Well, at the African level, we have almost won the bet of quality. Our bananas compete in terms of quality with those from Latin America. But we should reduce a lot of factors. Now, take, for example, the case of Cameroon. You have maritime freight. You cannot act on a trip to leave Cameroon, which is obviously 2 days more than leaving Abidjan for Europe. And that's the same case for Ghana. Well, those are things we cannot control, but by making better the use of our bananas in the European market, we believe that we can pay producers better. The challenges we face today is market. That is market for our produce. Now, it must be considered that African bananas, for reasons of proximity or strategic reasons, have access to the European market only. Now, this is not the case with Latin American bananas. Now, they have the American market, then the European market. That means they eat into our share, and that's why we think that we must limit and continue to maintain the imposed ceiling, which allows us to trigger backup mechanisms if a certain number of quotas are exceeded.
Alors, vous êtes actuellement à Bruxelles et vous avez rencontré.
Now, you met with members of the EU Parliament. What's their intervention?
De quoi avez-vous parlé précisément?
Well, as you said, banana is a product that is talked about and registered in various conventions, that is whether in Yaoundé, Lomé or Cotonou. Bananas are regularly the subject of protocol. We'd like to say that bananas should not be left out of the agenda of relations between the EU and the ACP countries. It is extremely important. That is why we are continuing and maintaining a dialogue with Europe, because bananas have always been taken into account in various conventions that have been signed between the EU and ACP countries. I would also like to remind you that in 1959, the signing of the European Economic Treaty was delayed precisely by the issue of bananas at the request of Germany. So it's always been present in relations between Europe and ACP countries, and we are simply asking that it should not go off the agenda in relations between the EU and the ACP countries.
Merci à vous.
Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Ce matin sur le Morning Call, Monsieur Owona.